Yo. Okay, we're back. Still rolling with big idea, constitutional democracy. Decent debates. I always want to get more people involved, but if you're actively listening, I mean, you're accountable for the information. Your thoughts and opinions matter at the ballot box at some point, or many other ways to politically participate. One of your vocab terms there. So let's take a look, though, today at 1B, which accordingly is Chapter 2. So I'm assuming all of it. Page 28, 30, 31, 69. So our main conversation is that the writing and ratification or approval of the Constitution emerged from the debate about weaknesses in the Articles of Confederation. So having a government as a confederacy in which sovereignty ultimately lied in the individual states, Pennsylvania, Maryland, etc., was the product of important compromises. And that's really, when we break down the debate and we look at the differences, the only way of going forward. I mean, a lot of times we look at it as a debate as something to win, which is fine. But really, the object of a debate is present your sides and then ultimately find common ground. If you don't do that, there is no governance whatsoever. So let's move on, take a look at individual objectives that we're going forward with. All right, so 3 of them, once again. Notice my Roy G. Biv color scheme. Explain the relationship between key provisions of the Articles of Confederation and the debate over granting the federal government greater power formerly reserved by the states. The idea really comes from the threat of an elite merging, balanced with the threat of a pluralistic society, where on one side, the elites see themselves as caretakers of the Union, and the pluralists, the Confederates, the anti-federalists, if you will, see that as a threat to everything they just fought against. So I feel like we've already debated that. We'll get into some specifics in this as well. Describe the impact of political negotiation and compromise at the Constitutional Convention on the development of the constitutional system. So this would include the Bill of Rights, the Great Compromise, the 3/5 Compromise, the Electoral College, who gets to vote, things of that nature. And lastly, explain how the issues raised in the ratification debate continue to be expressed today in ongoing philosophical disagreements about democracy and governmental power. We're going to focus most of our time in class on that, looking at the Fourth Amendment, illegal search and seizures, the writ of habeas corpus, and how that has been decimated by the Patriot Act of 2000, and I think it was 2 when that came out. And we'll be watching most likely a video from that era that really gets to the idea of your individual freedom and privacy versus the government's power to survey, spy, collect data, and where that line should be drawn, how that line moves and shifts, etc. A key premise in a lot of novels out there. I mean, if you look at this high school, for example, we got cameras everywhere. Should we? Well, yeah, maybe we should for the security of all. Wait, it violates privacy. But you're minors, so you don't have privacy rights anyway. But if we did, school is a microcosm. All right, so I guess our story begins with the first constitution, if you will, of the United States of America. And that was the idea, states being 13 of them, as individual sovereign nation states with distinct cultures, something that came up in the debate, distinct economies, and therefore distinct visions and goals of what they would like to do based on their own sovereignty. And really, the federal part of it, the central government, was subservient to those states, and mostly there as a friendship, the fellowship of the ring, in case of war. And the problems, as Chuck Norris would state, the Articles of Confederation are weak. Now, we don't know if we can assume that. I mean, the Anti-Federalists would argue otherwise, but I don't know. Let's find out. All right, so some of this came up in this, and this is really U.S. history. I don't think we have to be great experts on any of this, but a nice chart I found online. Congress had no power to levy or collect taxes. That was done at the state level. So the federal government was always broke. They had to sell off land, mostly west of the Appalachians, to private individuals, which makes wealthy private individuals very happy because they have more control of their property. And that's typically what the Federalists wanted. They were the elite, and they wanted their property rights protected. So this played right into their hand. Not sure why they were necessarily against it in that case. Probably the fact that the federal government was absolutely weak, so who could actually present or protect their rights at the end of the day? Congress had no power to regulate foreign trade. So you have each state competing with the states of Europe. I mean, for the European powers, France, Britain, not France necessarily, Spain, divide and conquer. They're already at each other's throats even after the war. Congress had no power to enforce its laws. They have no necessarily executive branch there. To enact laws at the federal level, you needed all 9 out of the 13 states, so a super majority. In order to amend the articles, actually change what's happening, this is what we do in our game, you needed a super majority. Well, even beyond that, my bad. You need all of them. You need a clear, unanimous, and when you're looking at, a Vermont to a Georgia, the geographical and cultural differences really got in the way. So you're already seeing that weakness of pluralism within the states. And you have to remember there's no internet. And so politics is greatly more localized. One of the things you guys brought up was the idea of we have a culture of obsession with the federal government. I would agree as well with that. And I think a lot of it has to do with geographical borders. People move around a lot more. It's a lot easier to move around. However, still to this day, you still have geographic isolation and therefore political differences much different. We'll talk about that more when we get into the compromises. No executive branch, no national court. So government way to settle disputes among states. It could lead to war and, again, self-destruction policies there. So generally speaking, these are the things outlined. More importantly is the compromises that come over it. But our story first begins with, man, I love this picture. I swear this was the same thing in my history book in high school with the Shays Rebellion. It's a different time when you'd see 15 men watching 2 men try to drown each other. I'm like, look at this guy. He's thoroughly enjoying it. This kid's afraid. Now, maybe the conspiracy theory in me often wonders, was this the snapping point, if you will? Was this the political leverage the Federalists needed to affirm that the articles were weak? I think it's quite possible. Maybe they didn't make it happen, but certainly allowed this to happen in order to prove the point. The federal government was too weak under the articles to stop this infighting, to not keep the state secure. So in walks, wait, this is cool. Hamilton, from the music Hamilton. Look at that, walking on water, because his point has been proven. The articles are weak and a stronger centralized federal government is needed. These are always fun. Watch this on your own, please. These are schmoops. So the story of Shays Rebellion in 2 minutes or so using weird graphics. So definitely check that out. Okay, so long story short is there was a debate that was going to convene, similar to what we did yesterday, in which, we're hindsight looking backwards, so it's always difficult to imagine what specific issues might have been discussed. But the Constitutional Convention of 1787 in Philadelphia. Okay, so 55 delegates from across the United Confederacy to fix the Articles of Confederation. And it came to realize that a whole new constitution must be written, and they're going to give it their go. And these were, by all accounts, the best and brightest the United States had to offer at this time, from lawyers to bankers to merchants. Definitely all white, definitely all, at this time, middle-aged. And although they were elite, they had different interests, for sure, based on the culture of their own states. And you tend to see the younger delegates, Jefferson, perhaps having a more optimistic view of human nature and the common man, therefore keeping government closer and more accountable to them with a more Confederate system, versus the Federalists, who tended to be older, Hamilton, Washington, Franklin, who were greatly troubled by the concept of government being too localized and the idea of factions forming. So many compromises will be made. Oh, yeah. Funny. Okay, so here they all are, broken down for you. Again, I'm assuming these things were worked out in United States history, but here's the plan. The idea really was, if you just have one house, let's start with the Great Compromise. What is problematic in that? If everyone had just, say, the Senate, so every state gets 2 representatives. In that case, a small state like Rhode Island, whose population minimal, gets the same amount of representation as Pennsylvania, New York, Georgia, who have incredible populations. And so the idea is right away that minority could usurp the majority. So if we look at the difference between the Virginia plan, Southerners, and the New Jersey plan, 3 separate branches. Okay, they agree on that. A bicameral House. However, both would be based on population. There's been call to move towards this. The idea that, now a state like California is held hostage by states like North Dakota and South Dakota in terms of anything getting through the Senate with that. If you look at the New Jersey plan, equals representation. The small states like that. So the compromise was a bicameral, 2 houses, representation based on population, the House of Reps, and which would be closer to the districts within the state. And then the senators would be more compliant with the federal system. Well, I'm doing a podcast for my government class, not for your class, so no one knows who you are.
What's up?
Hi.
Hello, brother.
He was just in here first hour.
He was?
He looked just like him.
Yeah.
That's
I'm just
all I
walking around.
Oh, sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, maybe I should pause it. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, little minor hiccup there. So yeah, the idea is just compromise. Same thing with the 3/5 compromise. Kind of weird to be talking about how a person should count as 3/5 of a person, but if you look at politically and the times, you could understand when part of your representation is based on population, then the southern states would, of course, want their slave population to count so they can have more representation in Congress. And so that's the idea. And you can see the other idea with taxation, population based on taxation there as well. So those, probably the biggest, without getting into importation of slavery, but you can read the bottom part there as well with that. Oh my gosh, Crash Course has a constitutional compromise. I'm quickly finding out that I will be obsolete in probably 10 years. I could, literally run this class from home by making you watch these videos, making up an SAQ or LAQ, checking it and sending it back to you. I mean, maybe that's the goal. Maybe that's the goal of our elite administrators at the highest level. Eventually, we won't be needed down here. Everything will be just based on a test through a corporation and watching these videos. I mean, it's all there. And I mean, do you guys even socialize anymore? So you lose that social aspect of school. You can all do it through, wow. What am I going to do? I'm going back to Farm and Fleet. Farm and Fleet I am. Moving on. All right. Another debate that enrages during this is if this Constitution of ours is wrong at some point, how do we go about actually changing the Constitution? And so Article 5, know that, of the Constitution puts forth the proposal of what is necessary to amend or change the Constitution and the ratification or approval process. I went with a nice little character here of, I guess Tim would call them something else, but maybe we would if it was 1919. The idea of the women's suffrage movement, human beings wanting representation in society. Or I suppose they just want attention. Easy for a white male to make that accusation. But from behind the veil of ignorance, what would one suggest? So that's our suffrages there. And that's my example. I don't know. It's the first one that popped in my head, perhaps because of the march. But 1920, 19th Amendment to the Constitution, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. And there she is, the proud flapper woman, voting away. Dun, dun, dun. So, Article 5, here it is. I mean, this is how it works. So, proposal to amend the Constitution. You would need 2/3 of Congress to propose it. And then there are some different courses the amendment can take. Obviously, we only have 27 in this country, so it does not happen often. But in order for it to be approved, it then needs to be ratified by 3/4 of the state legislators. So if you do the math, out of 50, I don't want to do the math. What is it, 40, 30 something, would have to approve it. You then also have national conventions and state conventions, which are a little different in terms of how the representatives are set in order to do there. It's very, very rare that those things happen. And it'll be discussed later in the course when we get into the more state governments and conventions. I've been to these conventions for our union. It's quite raucousy. A lot of yelling as you try to change a constitution, it's really quite fascinating just to watch from a people point of view. But that is the general framework there of which amending the Constitution takes place. I just threw this one in here as well. This seems to be the big discussion point of this unit, is the idea of why federalism is better than confederalism. So check that out for sure. And this doesn't have John Green. It has the other guy in it. But it's an imperfect document, the Constitution, for imperfect humans, filled with all sorts of compromises, from protecting individual rights to securing the actual nation. The last section I really want to look at, I think this is where we want to hang our hat, is the actual application of what seem to be dead ideas. Explain how the issues raised in the ratification debate continue to be expressed today in ongoing philosophical disagreements about democracy and governmental power. And so we focus on this. People willing to trade their freedom for temporary security deserve neither and will live both. Well, he's probably right, because if you really want to break that down, there's plenty to suggest we already have. From the NSA, nobody's in your telephone calls, right, agent? Yes, sir. The fear of government encroachment on our social media sites. We the people versus we the peepers. You can even see French has the idea of liberty and security together, but when security becomes bigger, it eats liberty. These are the big themes of this class, the fine line. And the document we're going to focus on is the Patriot Act, which at its inception, many believed was snipping away. You can look down here. Don't tread on me. Meh, so long as it's for national security purposes. And what event gives this catalyst? Well, the 21st century version of Shays Rebellion, the terrorist attacks on 9/11 and the 3,000 American deaths, approximately. So this theme is presented throughout American history, Western history, is the fear of the elites taking away the rights of the people, which many have fought and died for. And there's several tactics to do that. Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 41, I think that's still a school read, looks at one dystopia version of that. HBO is actually doing that movie soon. My favorite, 1984, George Orwell, which is in a complete, oh man, it's so good. We're reading it. I'm telling you, we're reading it. And what's genius, I think, is the movie that changed my life when I first saw it in the theaters, Fahrenheit 9/11. So it's obviously giving a shout out to 451 in its title, and also does a lot of shout out to Orwellian principles, and looks at the election of 2000, 9/11, and the Patriot Act, and poses the question of where are we heading? And what's scariest most is when I talk to many of you and you don't have any idea of what I was talking about from 15 years ago, very much an Orwellian concept. Once some great change becomes part of the collective normal, we forget it ever existed before, thus the slippery slope of losing our liberty in the hands of the elite. But maybe that's good, because they are the elite, so they must know better for us. Well, that's all I have for you today. So I don't know, let's just end on this note.